Home to the first theater in America, Charleston has the oldest theater scene in the country. From Flora, the first opera performance in America, to The Recruiting Officer, one of the most performed plays of the 18th century, Charleston has a history with the stage. However, here, some shows never end, and dying on stage takes on a whole new meaning. If you find yourself walking past Urban Outfitters at 371 King Street one hot summer night and happen to glance in the massive windows, be aware that someone might be staring back at you. A clean-cut young African-American man who silently mouths words before fading into shadow. Though this apparition has been seen many times since a retail store opened during Christmas 2005, it was also seen numerous times during the 1980s and 90s. During that time, the space was being used as a performance theater and for the Spoleto Festival. It was also during that time that the theater was having difficulty keeping janitors employed. There were so many incidents that happened that the janitor refused to work alone or at night. One particular janitor saw the same young African-American man appear and disappear out of the same seat numerous times. The final time that it happened, the janitor approached the man from the back. But when the janitor got within a few feet of the seat, the man turned to face him with a sweat-stained ashen face and dead bloodshot eyes. Then the man vanished from seat 108, leaving a very terrified janitor. The experiences left many wondering why the same apparition has been seen for decades and why always the same seat. To uncover that secret, you have to go back to when the building housed another business, the Garden Theater. Built in 1918, the Garden Theater was a popular venue for photo plays as well as the newer vibraphone talking pictures. It was during this time that most of the ushers were young African-American men. It was also during this time that the Jim Crow laws were still very strong in the South and racist acts were commonplace. One of these acts saw a young black usher beaten to death in the theater. The perpetrators of this murder then left the body in seat 108 in the whites-only section. What message could this apparition be trying to silently convey? The names of the murderers involved? Or maybe just a plea from a restless spirit. Welcome to the Black Fedora Mystery Comedy Theater. If you're looking for fun in Charleston the whole family can enjoy, look no further. But be warned, at the end of the night, it is a different show altogether. As every actor and employee here can tell you, when the crowds leave, that's when the occurrences begin. From appliances that begin and run on their own to shadowy figures that disappear between the restroom curtains. Nothing here is as it seems. To understand this haunting, though, you have to go back to the source, the 1800s, and what this location used to be. Just as a city market can trace its beginning to the early 1800s, so can the surrounding side streets. The site of the Black Fedora, 164 Church Street, traces its earliest occupants to 1816 and a mariner named John McKinley. In the years following, the site housed the Harper Brothers stables and horse sales before being built up into the brick shops and lodging that it is today. Perhaps the hauntings at the Black Fedora Theater is a remnant from this past, or perhaps something even older. A shadow from the 1700s when Charleston was still a walled city and the theater's location lay outside in no man's land. Death was always waiting at the gate. Perhaps at the Black Fedora Murder Mystery Theater, it still is. As an actor in Charleston for decades, I have firsthand experience with the entity at the Queen Street Playhouse. During a run of Arsenic on Lace back in 2006, I had several occurrences of being backstage alone and yet catching movement of a shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye. I've also had numerous experiences in the massive wardrobe at the far back of the theater. A claustrophobic wardrobe filled with 2 stories of costumes from every show imaginable. I've been back there many times, and I can tell you it is not a pleasant experience. You quickly get the sense that you're being watched and that there is always something waiting on the next aisle. Of course, there is always a possibility that it was just my imagination getting the better of me. As such, I began asking around to see if anyone else had similar experiences. To my surprise, I found that most people I approached had experiences ranging from the feeling of being watched backstage to seeing shadowy figures. The history of the location gives us a very clear reason for the haunting. The Queen Street Playhouse building was originally an old cotton warehouse dating back to 1850. Purchased by the Footlight Players, it eventually became their permanent performance space in 1941. After 45 years of productions, the building finally received a renovation in 1986 to make it the beautiful theater that it is today. Whereas the theater itself doesn't have a history of death, that area does. On January 15, 1778, long before the cotton warehouse was built, a fire tore through that part of town, laying waste to more than 250 buildings and innumerable outbuildings. In the aftermath of the fire, it was discovered that 6 people had lost their lives. It is believed that one of the fire's victims still haunts the area of their death, forever standing in the wings, watching with scorched eyes the play unfold. One of the most stunning theaters in Charleston, the Riviera is truly something to behold. But behind this Art Deco facade lies something much more frightening, a presence who calls the Riviera Theater home. According to Ghosts and Legends of Charleston by Denise Rofe, one of the most well-known sightings happened several years back during a tour of the space. According to Rofe, a young soon-to-be bride and her friends were staying at the Charleston Place Hotel and were offered a tour of the theater. However, during the tour, the bride excused herself to use the ladies' room and soon found herself in the hallway at the auditorium entrance. There, something stopped her in her tracks. A feeling that something was amiss, and a sound. A faint scratching sound coming from the auditorium. Curious, the young woman opened the auditorium door and rounded the corner, tracing the sound. As the seats came into view, she saw the source of the scratching. Kneeling on the second step between the seats was a woman scrubbing the carpet. A moment passed, and a horrific realization dawned on the young bride that she could see the lush carpeted floor through the cleaning woman. Terrified, the bride ran from the theater as a spectral woman kept scrubbing the non-existent stain. Over the years, the sightings and paranormal events have continued without explanation. It is not surprising given the history of the theater. Long before the Riviera was built, another theater was on the same site, the Academy of Music. Built in 1869, it was one of America's best-known theaters, noted for its almost perfect acoustics. The theater eventually fell in decay and was torn down in 1937 to make way for the new Riviera Theater, which opened its doors 2 years later. The new theater was a success and lasted until 1977. Threatened by demolition, the building was sold to the Charleston Place Hotel, which restored it and reopened it in 1997 as a conference space. Perhaps the original theater's denizens still make their rounds, forever keeping the building as pristine as the memory.
This is the Dock Street Theater, one of the oldest theaters in the United States. However, what is hard to tell by the outside is this is also one of the most haunted. What makes this haunting so special is that the ghosts that haunt behind these walls have been seen not just by the audience members, but by the actors on stage themselves.
Over the years, the sheer number of sightings and experiences is staggering. I personally know at least 5 actors who have been present during such occurrences. The paranormal incident that they all talk about the most is seeing the ghost on the upper balcony. Described as a man in a top hat and cape, this apparition apparently enjoys watching rehearsals since that is where he is seen the most. Actors running their lines on stage often notice him watching them from above. Stagehands, actors, and even managers have tried racing to the balcony to catch him, but he vanishes whenever anyone gets near. Another specter that has been reported for years is the Lady in Red. Adorned in a crimson dress, this beautiful young woman roams the halls, terrifying staff and visitors. And then just as quickly as she appears, she disappears as well. Other workers and volunteers have spoken about hearing disembodied voices and phantom footfalls in the empty building at night, and yet still others talk about the lingering smell of old cigars in a smoke-free building. One thing, however, that all these occurrences have in common is that they are remnants of a tragic past. The original Dock Street Theater opened its doors on February 12, 1735, making it their first building in America designed solely for performances. Unfortunately, that building burnt down 5 years later on November 18, 1740, in a massive city fire that claimed over 300 houses. Then, in 1809, the site was used in the building of a new hotel, the Planters Hotel, birthplace of the Planters Punch rum cocktail. The hotel was one of the most popular in Charleston and attracted clientele from all over the country. One such person was the noted 19th century actor Junius Booth, father of notorious John Wilkes Booth. As the century moved onward through disasters and the Civil War, Charleston was hit hard, physically and financially. To survive, many young women turned to the oldest profession, and at the Planters Hotel, nobody asked questions. One such young woman went by the name of Nettie Dickerson. A native of South Carolina, Nettie moved to Charleston for a better life and quickly obtained a job at St. Philip's Church. However, no matter how much she did for people, Nettie soon realized that she would always be considered an outsider by the Charleston elites. This realization, coupled with the constant passes being made at her by well-to-do men in Charleston, turned her mind to another pursuit, the Planters Hotel. There she found she could use her beauty to get back at the proper Charleston women who had snubbed her by turning the heads of their husbands. But as her boldness grew, so did her notoriety. She quickly found herself no longer welcome at St. Philip's Church and shunned by the same elites she envied. As the story goes, one night during a terrible lightning storm, Nettie stepped out onto the wrought iron balcony at the Planters Hotel. In a fit of anger and depression, she yelled blasphemies, taunting God's wrath. In reply, lightning struck the iron balcony, killing her instantly. At least, that's how the story goes. According to church records, Nettie isn't buried at St. Philip's, which isn't too surprising. A much more likely scenario would find poor Nettie in a potter's grave due to her limited means and reputation. In the years that followed, the hotel fell into disrepair. Luckily, in 1935, the building was saved by the city of Charleston, who spent $350,000 to renovate it and turn it into a theater. The Dock Street Theater's second grand opening took place on November 26, 1937, and the rest is history. Perhaps poor Nettie still does roam the halls in her red dress. Perhaps spirits do drink and smoke and carry on their frivolities. After all, as William Shakespeare once wrote, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. It does make one wonder, though, if all the world is a stage, who's in the audience? What dead eyes are watching us listlessly from a darkened theater? That is a question the actors at Dock Street Theater have been asking for years. Thank you for joining me tonight on this episode of Charleston City of Shadows. As always, if you enjoyed it, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button so we can keep you up to date on new episodes. Until next time, have a great week and stay safe.